Now it's time for the O'Hara News and Editorial. This is the show that brings you news through the lens of men's rights activism. Robert O'Hara and co-host James Huff bring you current events and important guests who will share their insights as well. We also invite the most important people to share their thoughts and experiences here on the one, you. This show invites callers to discuss the events of the week with the hosts and our guests. We want your involvement. So listen, call in, and experience the one show that gives it to you straight in a way no other media outlet will. Let's begin the O'Hara News and Editorial. Tonight, we have as our guest Richard Castalada of Men's Rights Group of Arizona, one of the most successful state-level men's rights organizations in the U.S. Arizona has been a hotbed of legislative and litigative activity concerning divorce, child custody, and domestic violence in recent years. Successes in the areas of men's rights include a comprehensive shared custody law enacted January 1st of last year, alimony reform, and the removal of a judge who was found to be referring DV cases to an anger management clinic owned by her. Men's Rights Group of Arizona stands out as an example that in spite of many naysayers who believe that the laws will never change, there is reason to believe activism can be highly effective. Now is a great opportunity to show your support for an important MHRM organization by calling in and engaging with someone who has a proven track record of success. And we're back with another edition of the O'Hara News and Editorial with myself, Robert O'Hara, and James Huff. James, how you doing this week?
It's been an interesting week so far.
I'm sure it has. It's always an interesting week here at ABFM News. There's a couple of interesting news stories tonight, but I do want to announce we're going to have a really good show tonight. We have a very, very good guest on tonight. Someone from Men's Rights Group of Arizona by the name of Richard Castalada. Men's Rights Group of Arizona has been an exceptionally successful men's rights group on the state level. Arizona was one of just a handful of states that has actually been successful in passing shared parenting laws. And also, they've been very energetic in litigation and trying to get, judges, and trying to get irresponsible and corrupt judges removed from the bench. So they're a success story, and that's the kind of thing that we like to expose here on the O'Hara News and Editorial. So this is going to be a great show. Please call in and engage. We're going to do an interview after the news with him, and we're going to take callers. So this is going to be a great show. Looking forward to it. James, do we have a news story tonight?
Yes, we do. This is coming out of AZ Central, the Arizona Republic. Arizona's statutory rape victim forced to pay child support. Now, Nick Olivas became a father at 14. A fact he wouldn't learn for 8 years. While in high school, he had sex with a 20-year-old woman. As he sees it now, she took advantage of a lonely kid going through a rough patch at home. State law says a child younger than 15 cannot consent with an adult under any circumstances, making Olivia's a rape victim. Sorry, that's Olivas. He didn't press charges and says he didn't realize at the time that it was even something to consider. Now, the two went their separate ways. He graduated from high school, went to college, became a medical assistant, and then 2 years ago, the state served him with papers demanding child support. And that's how he found out he had a 6-year-old daughter. He says, "It was a shock. I was living my life and enjoying being young. To find out you have a 6-year-old, it's unexplainable. It freaked me out." Of course, he panicked, ignored the legal documents, never got the required paternity test, and the state eventually tracked him down. Now, as a 24-year-old Phoenix resident, said he now owes $15,000 in back child support and medical bills going back to the child's birth, plus 10% interest. The state seized money from his bank account and is now garnishing his wages at $380 a month. He's become one of the state's 153,000 active child support cases, according to the Arizona Department of Economic Security Division of Child Support Services. In May alone, payments were not made in 49% of those cases, according to the agency. Now, he wants to be in his daughter's life and is willing to pay child support going forward, but he does not think it's right for the state to charge him fees incurred when he was still a child himself, or for the years he didn't know the girl existed. Quote, "Anything I do as an adult I should be responsible for," he said, "but as a teenager, I don't think so." Situations such as his are rare, but cases in several states have garnered attention. And while there has been some public outcry over charging a crime victim with child support, the courts have consistently said states have every right to do it. The most well-known case was a Kansas boy who, at the age of 13, impregnated his 17-year-old babysitter. Under Kansas law, a child under the age of 15 is legally unable to consent, and the Supreme Court in 1993 ruled that he was liable for child support. California issuing a similar state ruling a few years later in the case of a 15-year-old boy who had sex with a 34-year-old neighbor. In that case, the woman was convicted of statutory rape. But of course, he still had to pay. In both cases, it was the state social services agency that pursued the case after the mother sought public assistance. The Kansas court determined that the rape was irrelevant and that the child support was not owed to the rapist but rather to the child, said Mel Felt, director of the New York-based advocacy group, the National Center for Men. In Arizona, the Department of Economic Security oversees child support enforcement. Its written policy is not to exempt situations like his from child support responsibilities unless the parent seeking child support has been found guilty of sexual assault with a minor or sexual assault. Quote, we don't see those cases very often, and we're really glad for that, said Attorney Janet Sell, Chief Counsel with the Attorney General's Office Child and Family Protection Division. But DES officials said the intent of the rule is to ensure that the child, who had no control over the situation, is cared for. Of course, the article does go on, explains a little more detail what some child support cases have been like, but we've got the gist here. What do you think of this, Robert?
This case, I saw this myself. You sent me the link earlier on. This case exemplifies every single thing that's wrong with the state of men's reproductive rights in our society. First of all, you have the subordinate instance of this kid who was taken advantage of by an adult when he was a child. But even beyond that, let's say he wasn't even a child when this happened. This pregnancy and the subsequent birth the knowledge of this was withheld from him by the mother for a long time, for almost 8 years. Then she decides when the medical bills start coming in, when she needs money and she goes to get state assistance to go do so. And then, of course, it's always the state agency that comes after the guy. And they don't care what the circumstances were, because right now in our society, the definition of a father is sperm donor turned ATM machine. And you brought up the Kansas case where this kid was run down for child support. They said, well, the rape doesn't matter, and because the money isn't going to the mother, it's going to the child.
I've got a question. I've got a really good question here. They're going to entrust a child to an individual who fucked a child.
Who is a child predator.
They're going to entrust a child to an individual who fucked a child.
Who is a child predator. And you look at the comments of the story and say, oh, well, by doing this, the child's already had their dad taken away, so now we're going to take their mom away by giving the kid to the dad and putting the mom in jail. Well, hold on a second. You're going to allow a child predator to have custody of their kid? And, of course, you always go back to the same double standard proof where, like, let's say it was a man who was the statutory rapist of a 14-year-old girl when he was any age over the age of 18. Would they give this guy the custody of the kid and let him collect child support money for this kid? No, that is something that is completely inconceivable. Completely inconceivable. But since it's the person who has a penis that these people at social services are going after, they don't care. They don't care. And here is the big thing. This is why there's no, well, this is one of the many reasons why there's no movement, because there's never been a case where someone who was the victim of a male victim of statutory rape, who has been hit with child support payment order, has had that order overturned. There's never been a single case where that's happened. They say it's rare. I dispute how rare this situation is. I think it happens a lot more often than people think it does. But the real reason why these things are so hard to overturn when it's a male victim of statutory rape that's being forced to pay, I think, is because once one of these cases goes to a state Supreme Court and the guy's let off the hook, like he should be, because he is a victim of sexual assault. He could not consent to sex and therefore could not consent to parenthood. Of course not. Once they let that happen, they know that pries open the way just a little bit to men having parity of reproductive rights with women. It's this thing that all these people and all these state agencies that collect child support, they are scared to death of that concept. So the judges won't touch it. All these judges on the bench in the Supreme Courts, they won't touch it. They don't want to hear cases like this. They just don't. So they don't get hurt. Because they know that it's not just unfair, it is abhorrent. It's abhorrent for this to happen. It's exploiting somebody twice.
Hey, hold on, Robert. We
Sure.
might have a problem here.
Okay.
Give me just a second. Oh no, hold on. We have to reconnect.
Oh, to what? What's going on?
Hold on a second. All right, we're going to reconnect.
To what? Radio 360?
Yep.
Okay.
We completely lost it.
Okay, was this a bandwidth problem or something? going to announce things in the chat room.
It's okay. It's all right. Give it just a second here. We should be going back on the air in just a second.
Okay.
We are recording, though. We are recording. Okay, we are back. Ha 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 ha. We are back.
We're back. Sorry for the interruption, folks. There was a problem with Radio 360. It is now resolved. Yes, we're back. Sandwich Heist and 3rd of the October say, yes, you're back. Great. I hope we didn't lose too much of our rant there, my rant on the complete disparity between male reproductive rights and female reproductive rights and all the things that are messed up about it. But I think you all get my point. This kid was victimized twice. First by a childhood predator, a child predator who wanted sexual gratification and also to have a child, make a unilateral decision to have a child without his involvement. And then years after this kid being born, decides to come back and sue this guy for child support. Well, no, she decided to go get state help. And then the state, not her, decided to go after this poor guy whose life is just starting right now, who never knew he was a dad, who was a victim of statutory rape. And now he's got to pay child support. He's got to pay all these medical bills. He's got to pay all this back child support. And it's ruining his life.
And they're going to leave the child in the care
of a childhood predator.
Of a child predator. Go figure. Yeah, because even a mother who's willing to rape a kid is better than a father, right?
Of course.
Of course.
She's a superior parent, James.
Oh, yeah.
Because
we know how this goes.
And a vagina.
And this is exactly how our courts run.
Right, and she has all these privileges and no responsibility whatsoever. She is, in fact, herself a child in this regard. But he's a man. He's got to man up.
Yeah, he better man up.
Better man up.
Yep.
You're an adult now. Oh, you had sex with a girl. You better man up. You had sex with her.
Yep, let's never mind the fact you were 13 or 14
years
old.
You're 34, it doesn't matter. You better man up, young man.
Right.
Hey, you play, you gotta pay.
Let's reverse that situation for just 1 second and imagine some girl being forced to carry it to term after getting fucked by a 30-year-old.
Yeah, and then the guy getting custody of the child and then suing, and then she has to pay
suing her for child support. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I can promise you, if something like that were to happen, there'd be fires on the lawn of the White House.
There would be riots everywhere.
Oh yeah,
and it wouldn't be just feminists. It would be all these.
Oh yeah, it'd be all these blue pill motherfuckers
who see this kind of thing on a regular basis, and this does happen on a regular basis. They say it's rare. I don't think it's that rare. These same people who would tell this kid, oh well, hey, listen, it's his kid. He's got to man up. He's got to pay child support. Those same people will be out burning couches on the state house lawn or the courthouse, or throwing bricks into the windows of the judges' offices or the state child support offices. Yep. They would be doing every
single one of these blue pill guys out there.
Yep.
Would be screaming for blood. Oh, that might be my daughter. Yeah, let's fuck your sons though, right?
That's right. Hey, he's a man now. He had sex with a woman, and made a baby.
Now he gets to pay.
Now he has to pay, even though he didn't even know he was a dad. He has no say in his kid's life, and he was the victim of a predator when he was 14 years old. Amazing. And they say, oh, this money's going to go to the kid. This is all about the kids. No, it's not. It's about the state getting, first of all, matching funds for the money they collect for themselves. And it goes to the mother, who has no accountability as to how this money's spent. None whatsoever.
Oh, no. Well,
they call this in the best
she might be buying that next pair of Nikes for her next child.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know? Come
She
here,
might
little
be
boy.
buying a
I
six-pack.
got a nice
She
pair of
might be
Nikes
buying
for
a
you.
six-pack for the next
Come knock me
14-year-old
up.
kid she's gonna fuck.
Yep.
That's what's happening.
I want double the child support.
That's right. Oh, hey, I can. It's easy to get a 14-year-old.
See you in court in 8 years, kid.
Yeah, seriously.
Fucking unbelievable.
Disgusting. We say it's unbelievable, and they say that this kind of thing happens rarely. I dispute that. There are no statistics as to how often this happens. The only statistic we know for sure is that there has never been a case where a male victim of statutory rape who has been hit with a child support order has ever been able to overturn that child support order on the grounds that he was the victim of statutory rape. That is a God Almighty important statistic. Why is this? I think it's because people, not just feminists, but these people in these state agencies who make money off this whole racket, and it's a racket, they are scared to death of men having any kind of similarity, any kind of parity at all with reproductive rights with women. They're scared to death of it. They know that this inequity, this monstrous inequity, massive discrimination, is their meal ticket. We have to go to other stories. We got one I want to get to now. This is coming from Pittsburgh. Man locked up after being attacked by metal pipe wielding ex-girlfriend. This is a situation where a man was attacked by his ex-girlfriend on the porch of his own home, and he videotaped the situation, and there were witnesses to what happened, but he gets locked up anyway. And he at the time of this story, the time the story was published, which was last week, late Friday of last week, this man was still in jail. He had already spent a week in jail. And there's this video that's actually been posted on the internet of this woman assaulting him with a metal pipe. And the story reads: a local man is behind bars after his family says he was assaulted in front of his young daughter by an angry ex-girlfriend wielding a metal pipe. The woman has not been charged, and his family now believes he's the victim of a flawed criminal justice system. Go figure. Justin Lindsay, 24, has been lodged in the Beaver County jail for nearly a week. He is facing charges of simple assault and harassment. His mother, Twyla Lindsay, has been making dozens of phone calls and knocking on doors trying to get him out of jail before next week, when he may lose his job because of his absence. The irony is that Lindsay was charged after he was attacked with a metal pipe by his former girlfriend, Ramicha Clark, who showed up at his Aliquippa home a week ago. We spoke to Clark overnight. She claims she asked Lindsay to give her the child back since it was not his visitation time. She claims he says no and would return the child the following morning. Clark became outraged when she and her cousin drove to his home and saw Lindsay was on the porch with their young daughter and another woman. The mother drove up, seeing the other woman, and she just snapped out, said Justin's mother. Ramicha says that she has repeatedly asked Lindsay not to keep their daughter around other women, and she claims he agreed to that. The two exchanged words and insults. Ramicha Clark said she spit on Lindsay. She claims he then punched her. The former girlfriend picked up a metal pipe and started swinging it at Lindsay, knocking his cell phone out of his hand. Now, the video, he never assaulted her in the video. She just hit him with a pipe. Clark left Lindsay's house, but she didn't go home. She went immediately to the authorities. She has not been charged because she told them that he did this assault to her, said Twyla. She called a 24-hour magistrate on Friday, and he gave her a PFA and told Aliquippa police to pick my son up. He used his phone to videotape the assault, but his mother says the police refused to look at the video when she and her husband brought their son to Aliquippa police station, where charges were filed. Me and his dad went with him to turn himself in to the police. They refused to look at the video, refused to hear his side, Twyla said. So this was Friday last week, and I don't know whether or not this guy's still in jail. He may very well possibly be. If he is, he's lost his job already. And this video's right here. I'm going to put this link in the.
Already got it.
You already got it. You got it in the. You got it in the box.
Yep.
I mean, seriously, this woman became extremely violent. Just came right up, unprovoked assault with a metal pipe. Went up and hit the guy, knocked the cell phone out of his hand. Then got back in her car and left. And she called up the police. She called up the 24-hour magistrate and said, "This guy assaulted me, and now this guy's been in jail for a week." Classic mandatory arrest and primary aggressor Violence Against Women Act laws that are supported financially by the Violence Against Women Act. Classic feminist police training. This guy's in jail, and he was assaulted. Why? Because his ex-girlfriend came and saw their daughter hanging out on this guy's porch, on the dad's porch, with his new girlfriend, and she just freaked out about that. Can you imagine what would happen to a guy who went up and started beating on his ex-girlfriend with a lead pipe?
Yeah, I can. I bet you he would have been arrested.
He would never get out.
And I'll bet you anything, if the girlfriend would have taped that shit on her phone, they'd have been all over that evidence. It would have been
national news.
Yep. Look at that. That stuff would have been
national.
That stuff would have been splashed all over World Star Hip Hop and TMZ. Oh my God, dude, this is nuts.
But
how the hell does this happen?
Well, it happens because a couple of things, because we have these messed up domestic violence laws, and we have these messed up attitudes that we have towards women and violence. It's messed up.
See, I every time I look at shit like this, I keep feeling like I'm going down the rabbit hole. For a single moment in my life, I deal with people who are actually sane, and then I look at things like this, and it just throws me right back down the rabbit hole again. Unreal. So real.
It's real.
It's real.
Again,
I can't believe
this must be rare. No, it's not rare at all. This happens all the time. Why? Because the law allows for this to happen. That's it.
Oh, man. What else you got for us, man?
Well, I do have one more story, and even though it's going to be that time, this one will be pretty quick. And this is kind of sort of along the same lines. This is coming from the UK, from our friends at the Mail Online. This title came out story came out last week on the 26th, entitled "Husbands Who Tell Their Wives They're Fat May Be Guilty of Domestic Abuse," says Labor Shadow Minister. The bylines: claim made by Seema Malhotra, Labor's anti-missionary spoken. She said abuse can be part of a pattern of controlling behavior at home. Criticizing a woman's appearance could be an indicator of physical abuse. Husbands who constantly criticize their wives over their weight or appearance may be guilty of domestic abuse, a Labor frontbencher has suggested. Seema Malhotra, Labor's new shadow, I don't know what this term means, shadow anti-domestic violence minister. Maybe if there's someone in the UK that can explain this to me, please call in, this shadow anti-domestic violence minister, said such abuse could be part of a wider pattern of, quote, controlling behavior, which can be as bad as a physical attack. She said, quote, it can be part of a pattern of controlling behavior that leaves people feeling fearful and terrorized in their own homes. Miss Malhotra said repeatedly criticizing a woman's appearance could be seen as, quote, an indicator of physical abuse in the future. She told Mail Online that woman she spoke to had been forced to flee her home after her husband attempted to control her entire life. But she said it started with him criticizing her appearance. Okay, I'm going to stop right here.
Hold on.
Basically what happens is that this woman was living with this guy who was an asshole. criticizing her appearance and started, I've been in situations like that where I basically said, fuck you, bitch, and I left. That's not disempowering. That's empowering. That's called being an adult. If you're with someone who acts like that and you leave, that's what you do. You don't expect to get the government involved. You don't expect there to be a law involved. You certainly don't expect to enable. You don't expect the government to enable you to stay with that person and to control what that person says. No, you leave that person. Why? Because you're an adult. So, that being said, I'm going to continue. The Labor MP said she felt traumatized. For this woman, her journey, her nightmare, started out with him making these comments about her appearance and progressed to want to control what she looked like and where she went until he had total control over her.
Okay, oh my God.
He didn't have total control over her. She left.
Weak.
You can do that. If you are an adult, a self-actualizing adult, you can end a relationship that you might have with another adult.
That's right.
You can do that.
That's called common courtesy and common respect.
It's called basic common sense. Okay? You're being an asshole to me, or you're shitting on my appearance and you want to control my life. I'm going to leave. Bye. This should be celebrated. This shouldn't be lauded as some kind of terrible victimization. No. But they are calling it victimization. Okay, back to the story. Ms. Malhotra said she was not talking about arguments between couples or snide remarks made in anger, but a wider pattern of behavior which leads to abuse. She told the Times that the domestic abuse, quote, affects women and men of all backgrounds, rich and poor, white and black, and ethnic minority.
Hey, you're cutting out just a little bit, man.
Okay, well, all right. Sorry about that. You know what? We've got the gist of the story. We don't need to talk about this anymore. It's bullshit.
I do have one thing to say, though. I do have one thing to say. For as critical as many people are, when they look at themselves in the mirror, should they be going to jail for committing domestic violence?
No. Even if they are being assholes. Because why? Because the person they're criticizing can, as in this case, simply leave. They can simply end the relationship.
Not that hard. Not that hard.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, not only is it not that hard, why do you, as an adult, as an self-actualizing adult, want to give over control of your adult agency over to the state? That, to me, seems much more dangerous.
But they don't care. They just want to alleviate their immediate confidence issues.
Well,
and get paid for it, because these people are getting paid for it.
Well, here's the thing: you have this situation. You have this another Labor Party politician, and the Labor Party is in really bad shape right now, and this is one of the main reasons why, because of this crap. Who feels it's the state's business to go and save any woman who's being even criticized about her appearance from their evil male oppressors because of the guy. Well,
God.
I mean, sure, the guy might be an asshole. What do you do with the guy who's an asshole?
The state,
you leave the guy. You say bye-bye.
The state is a massive Captain Save-A-Ho.
Crazy.
All right, guys.
All right, whatever. I mean, we've said enough.
Going to a break, guys. We'll be back in a few.
we are back with the O'Hara News and Editorial, and our guest, Richard Castalada, is with us. Richard, how you doing tonight?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Great. Richard Castalada is a member of Men's Rights Group of Arizona. They have seen some pretty stunning successes in recent years compared with other state-level men's rights groups, and that's why we asked them to be on tonight, because we think that's important to accentuate successes in the men's rights movement as opposed to failures or inaction. I'm just going to say this right now, one of the reasons why this is something I feel very strongly about. There are so many people in our movement that say, oh, these laws are never going to change, we're never going to get anywhere because there's too much gynocentrism, there's too much blue pill people, there are too many white knights, and I just don't believe that. I think that there's a lot of hope, and I've seen Men's Rights of Arizona, from what I've read of them, people in that state were successful in getting shared parenting laws passed, successful in getting alimony reform, and successful in holding local judges to accountability. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight with Richard. So, Richard, give us a little bit of background about Men's Rights Group of Arizona before we start.
Well, the Men's Rights Group of Arizona actually started as a book club back in 2011, kind of reading some of the more popular books of the men's rights movement. About 6 months after it kind of started, the two founders, who were old and retired, decided to go ahead and move from Arizona to Florida. Therefore, leaving me the keys to the car, so to say. After they left, I ended up pretty much ramping up the Men's Rights Group of Arizona to be more of an activist men's rights organization instead of a book club. I want to say back in 2012, we actually developed our first police trainings course, which is basically a certified course that we can teach police officers to identify female batterers and male victims, and when they respond to domestic violence calls. This course is actually approved by the state of Arizona to give certification hours and for education hours for certified law enforcement officers. That's probably one of our bigger successes early on.
Has that been successful? Has that been successful?
It has been. It has been successful to the point where we had received some calls in regards to training law enforcement agencies. Since our first initial training class, after that initial one back in, let's say, early 2013, a lot of these law enforcement agencies actually got pushback from other behavioral health agencies, such as Pinellas Bennett Council Against Abuse, and even the larger behavioral health agency called Simpatico, who got wind that we were teaching police officers about female batterers. And ever since then, apparently these feminist liberal groups ended up writing a letter or contacting every single law enforcement agency in the state of Arizona and saying that we were teaching faulty domestic violence theorem, and therefore, since that time, basically theory, we basically, we're still fighting that fight, and we're still offering the training class. But after our first one, we haven't really been able to get any bites off of to try to get our training class started with another agency. So that was a little bit disappointing. But then we kind of at that point, we actually turned our focus to the judges who are sitting in our court system, which that's a whole other cup of tea as well. So around 2012, we actually started looking at some of our municipal court judges, because out here in Arizona, I'm not too sure if you guys are aware, that you do not have to be an attorney or even have a college degree in order to be a judge here in the state of Arizona. You have to basically the municipal court judges handle misdemeanor cases. And misdemeanor cases are part of the majority of all domestic violence cases out here in Arizona. And so, therefore, these judges are elected every 4 years or so. And basically, the only requirement for you to be a judge is that you have not committed a felony and that you are a citizen of the United States. So, therefore, becoming a judge basically depends upon, how many votes that you can get. And we found out that here in Arizona, there's a lot of places where these liberal behavioral health agencies have actually not only promoted, but actually donated large sums of money to some of these judges for election campaigns.
Right.
So when we were doing some more digging back in early 2012, we found out there's a judge out of Eloy, which her name is Judge Marie Lerona. And we found out that not only was she a sitting judge, she actually owned her own behavioral health agency called the Pinal Hispanic Council. She basically had owned the agency since, according to the Arizona Corporation Commission records, she owned the behavioral health agency since 1991. And she was a judge in that court, in the Eloy Justice Court, the same year that she opened and operated her own behavioral health agency. So there was too much of a correlation there to not, basically not to draw attention. Well,
so
I guess
she was referring cases to her own behavioral reform agency, to her own anger. Well, you may as well just call what it is. She was actually doing this on a regular basis, saying, "Oh, you're going to go to this anger management course here, and you're going to pay for it, or the state's going to pay for it, and I'm going to get some money because I own it." Basically,
that's correct. Basically, what she was doing is she was convicting anyone and everyone that was required to take behavioral health classes such as domestic violence, mental health issues, or like a drug or a drinking issue, and she would just convict them. Sadly, things actually got worse as soon as she was elected, because about 3 years later, she actually was charged with an ethics violation for basically tampering with other courts within Pinal County, where she was getting her friends and family off of minor traffic tickets. And not only was she, just politely asking, fellow judges to not give their friends or family a traffic ticket, she was actually demanding that, demanding this level of difference between her family and her friends. And so basically, one of the judges who was threatened by her filed an ethics complaint, and they actually kicked her off the bench for 90 days. But when they were doing the background investigation on her back in 1993, I want to say, they didn't find this huge conflict of interest where she actually owned her own behavioral health agency. Well, because she's a judge, it has to be elected, right? This kind of hit the news and was looking really, really bad for her. Well, lo and behold, she got saved when Bill Clinton signed the first Violence Against Women Act back in the mid-'90s. I want to say like 1994.
1994 is when it was enacted, yes.
Yeah, 1994. And so what happened was that she started dipping into the funds. And this report, which I found in the National Institute of Justice website, which is run by the federal government, who kind of oversees a lot of the grants. The report actually lists that her agency, the Pinal Hispanic Council, and her very own court was actually getting funding based upon how many convictions she had in her court. So, and now again, the report doesn't list her by name, but they list her as the director of the Pinal Hispanic Council. And if you go back to the Arizona Corporation Commission records, you basically see her listed as the owner of Pinal Hispanic Council at the same time that this report was written. So, I mean, so basically, make it like a long story short, we actually found this out back in 2012 and filed several ethics violations with the Arizona Ethics Commission for judicial review, and they found they give her like 2 warning letters, and then all of a sudden, surprisingly, she just said, "Well, I can't run for re-election no more." In the community, so there was something there to where she was forced to either resign from her position as a judge in the Illinois Justice Court, or she had to sell her interest in the Behavioral Health Agency. Well, her Behavioral Health Agency is so lucrative, she'd rather give up her judgeship or her judicial position than to actually give up her Behavioral Health Agency.
Right.
So, that was like another win for us as well. And we actually documented, one entire case about this entire issue. And we actually turned this into an actual textbook about male victims of domestic violence about in early May. So we as an organization now have started publishing books about these issues. So I can pretty much go on and on and on about this stuff, but I bet you anything you probably want to talk about something else.
Let's go on to the next thing. Let's go on. First, let's talk about the shared parenting or shared custody, as it's called in Arizona. How that bill came about. It was enacted in January of 2013, January 1st of 2013. One of the small handful of states that actually has a comprehensive shared parenting bill, or rather law, on the books. How did this come about? Who were the players in this, and what was the resistance, and where do things stand now with it? It is law right now in Arizona for judges to give equitable distribution of time between both parents. Tell us how this came about. I'm assuming that the effort goes back many years before 2013. But just give us some background on that and tell us the way things stand now.
Well, there basically is, how you were saying at the very beginning of the show that there are some people that kind of say, well, things don't ever change, right? I mean, we don't have enough people, we don't have all these type of different excuses, right? Well, this one man in Sholo, or Northern Arizona, to be exact, he basically decided to. He was going through a divorce, and he had 2 sons, and he was quite concerned that he was going to lose his son during his divorce. Well, this guy, he didn't have a college, education, and he didn't, he didn't have any kind of formal training like in law or even politics or social activism. He wasn't even really a men's rights activist before all this happened. But basically what he did is that he started to develop contacts. He started calling around. He started educating himself about the laws of Arizona. And so as he was educating himself about the laws of Arizona, he ended up getting in contact with his state representative. Because again, when you're local, you do know the ins and the outs of the political system usually within your area. So he contacted his elected official, and to make like a long story short, I mean, he ended up getting a bill passed pretty much by himself, and with the help of a paralegal, which now both of these individuals actually now run and have an organization of their own within Arizona as well. And so basically what he did was he was basically an army of one, and he fought this case by himself. And not only did he fight this case by himself, but him and a paralegal, I want to say his name is Brent Miller. He is a very accomplished paralegal, and he's helped many men out with domestic violence cases, domestic violence divorce cases, and they kind of worked together to help get this bill in the state legislature, and they made contacts with the legislators themselves. And I want to say over about a span of about a year, they ended up getting the bill passed. And again, these were just two people that were hard-nosed enough to get it done. But see, like, they're not the only ones who actually, who became armies of one to change the laws here in Arizona. If you really look into some of the domestic violence laws or even some of the case law for divorces, in the past 3 years, we've had a number of individuals who were like armies of one, who ended up changing state law and actually set precedents in court. And now that those precedents right now are actually in case law. And so, there's at least 5 individuals who actually, that's just one case out of about 5 that has, that's like a demonstration or an example of an army of one. There's another case just recently where a man who was going through a divorce, his ex-wife did, she claimed that, he was charged with domestic violence and that he is assaultive and abusive. And what happened was this individual was falsely charged and arrested for domestic violence. Something that, that's just quite, as you all know, it's quite common. Well, he ended up, getting charged. He was arrested. He was sentenced to do like 26 domestic violence classes and had to be on unsupervised probation for a year. And this was 4 years, I want to say 4 years before his divorce actually hit the court system. Well, he actually, got his divorce to the point where he appealed the decision in his divorce. And now it went to the Arizona Supreme Court. And the Arizona Supreme Court ruled that, allegations of domestic violence cannot be held against men for longer than a year, that have been substantiated. So any kind of domestic violence allegation or issue, if it happened, like a year or more from the time the papers were filed, the divorce was filed, then what happens is that they cannot use it as a domestic violence,
If it's not substantiated, they can't use it in the divorce court, basically.
Correct.
Which is huge, because in most places that's not the case. Just the accusation alone will give you a serious disadvantage in divorce court, which is why these accusations are so common.
Exactly. And but now in the state of Arizona, because that one man, and I don't remember his name, this one man took a stand, took the fight to his ex-wife, to the court system, and actually made change to how divorce allegations, these false allegations, most of them work. And basically he was just one individual who basically had the cojones enough to stand up for his rights in a court of law. And now let me remind you, he didn't have an attorney when he was going through this. He did this himself. Through dogged determination, and he just kept after it. And again, there's many examples here in Arizona that I can tell you about that. There are many armies of one, and here in Arizona, I think maybe, I'm not too sure about other states, but it seems like being an army of one, of like one men's rights activist, you can do a lot of good. You just got to be determined and dogged enough to keep fighting.
Talk to us about the opposition. What kind of groups have been? Obviously, there's been opposition to this. We know who they are. And every state's always the same. But if you could tell in the particular instance in Arizona, I'm assuming that, of course, the domestic violence people who are very well funded came out against these initiatives, and of course the trial lawyers, and I'm sure sure some judges weren't very friendly to it, and some legislators. Can you tell us about the opposition to these reforms?
Well, at first, this bill, when it was passed, it was kind of like under the radar because no one really did think it was going to pass when it was first pushed. And all of a sudden it was passed into law, and all of a sudden a lot of the feminist and liberal groups were really out, they were scratching their head. And since it has been passed, it has been an absolute success. And I'll give you some problems, though, that this law has actually kind of drummed up here in superior courts here in Arizona. One of the first things is that these superior court judges have been so hardened to avoid giving custody to fathers that sometimes they don't even follow the law. And this is really, really huge in Pima County, where Tucson is located. Tucson and Cochise County, these county superior courts, they're either ill-informed about this new law, or they just choose, in some cases, just not to even follow it. It's almost like they cherry-pick cases, which ones they're going to follow the new law and which ones they're not. So that's kind of come into an issue. And you can find that these courts that have these issues with this new law are usually in more liberal-leaning counties, especially in Pima County, Cochise County, and Santa Cruz County. Those counties really have a how can you say it? They kind of turn a blind eye to this law that's been passed. Besides the courts themselves, there is an organization called the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. Because this law has been so successful in keeping men and fathers with, very active and very engaged with their children, and it's actually also reduced child support payments greatly.
Do you have figures on that? Is there anybody that's actually calculated like how much in total the reduction in child support payments has actually happened? Has it been like a reduction of 50% or 40% or more than 50%?
Well, just from like the men that I actually helped to kind of help them out with their divorce case, because they were kind of worried about how much they're going to pay, and they're kind of doing their own case themselves. I went on to the Arizona Child Support Calculator, and I was helping them out and putting in their figures for them and kind of helping them out a little bit. And the average child support award that I've seen under this new law is about $150 a month, which is vastly nothing compared to what it used to be.
What did it used to be? Probably like maybe $300 to $400 a month, at least.
Correct.
Maybe not more.
Correct. Well, before 2006, it was actually quite high. It was around $500 to about $600.
Right.
And then the child support law changed after 2006 to try to they kind of like tinkered with the matrix pretty much, and the child support actually went down by about $150 because the economy in Arizona was kind of going a little bit bad at that time. Right. But now the new child support guidelines that was enacted in 2011 actually also further reduced the child support awards. Now, taking that into account, here in Arizona, alimony is very, very, very difficult to be awarded. There's a lot of stipulations with that. You have to be married for at least 10 years. You have to prove that that you cannot financially support yourself.
Right.
So taking those two things into account, with this new law, there's been very little, if any, money who has been exchanging hands. And in some cases, I've actually seen men who are actually not only winning alimony against their ex-wives, they actually are gaining child support. And a great example of this is my assistant director, Brett Koch, he basically not only took his wife to court, he won custody of his kids, child support, and alimony. So it's becoming more and more common. But kind of going back to what you were asking with the opposition, the opposition now is not so much about fighting back against the law directly. The opposition right now is actually fighting the law indirectly. And what they're trying to do, this Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence is trying to do in the state legislators, they're trying to pass mandatory arrest laws in domestic violence cases. Because this new divorce law basically states that this shared parenting it's a mandate unless there has been either some type of child abuse or domestic violence within the home. Well, you circumnavigate that law by attacking that law through domestic violence statutes.
By these unconstitutional laws that take away due process, and there's money available for people who want to pass these laws in the state. These predominant aggressive laws and the mandatory arrest laws will be funded by the Violence Against Women Act. There's money in the pipeline for that, for those who want to pass this law, even though, of course, this is not a problem, more so than it is in any other state. The only reason it's a problem now is because now men are actually getting custody. They're getting more time with their children and paying less in child support, and that's the real problem. It has nothing to do with any kind of increase in child abuse or ex-spousal abuse or whatever. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the money. Is that the correct analysis?
Yeah, that's correct. But a lot of people, going back to this whole Army of One thing, topic, I recently wrote and published a book in May about one victim of domestic violence out of Eloy, Arizona. And this individual, he was arrested, falsely charged falsely for domestic violence, the whole 9 yards, right? Well, under the new Violence Against, under the law, he basically took not only his ex to court and sued her for false, for making false allegations. He actually took the police department and the individual officers to court, based upon their statements, and they lost as well. So a lot of these now victims of domestic violence here in Arizona pretty much now have a blueprint. If they are arrested and charged falsely on a case of domestic violence, there is a mechanism in the state law where you can sue these individuals under civil law and be awarded financial restitution based upon a false arrest. The only question is, do they have the courage to do it? And trust me, it takes plenty of courage to go fight not only your criminal case at the same time, but also it takes plenty of courage to go ahead and fight these individuals in civil court, because that's exactly what you got to do.
Right.
So again, that and if anyone's interested in reading my book, it deals specifically with domestic violence issues here in the state of Arizona, and it actually has 3 parts to it. It has this male victim story from the very beginning of the relationship until the very end, all the way through trial. It also has 2 transcribed domestic violence trials, transcribed word for word, so people can actually see how little evidence is actually needed to actually get a conviction, which is not much. Basically, the woman shows up.
Yeah.
And the third part of my book actually deals with the current statistics on male victims and female batterers. And this woman in my book that actually chronicled, her name is Carrie Kimball. And not only, she was actually sued by this individual and lost in Superior Court, but she filed for bankruptcy to get out of her judgment.
Right.
But this individual is actually a teacher at a local high school, and she not only does she have a a substance abuse issue. She's bipolar and she's completely violent. But then again, this woman is in a classroom teaching our kids. But that's a whole other tangent, So, but I think your original question was about the attacking this law, and they're basically attacking it through domestic violence issues.
I see. Okay, James, let's do a music break, and we'll announce the phone number. The call-in number is 214-272-0408. Again, that's 214-272-0408. We're going to put that in the chat room. We invite your calls. We'll do a short music break for everybody to get their stuff together, and we'll be back to take some calls. And we're back with Men's Rights of Arizona. Richard Castalada is with us, and we are waiting for callers still. The call number is 214-272-0408. Again, that's 214-272-0408. Richard, so we were just talking during the break about some things about how happy you said you were to be living in Arizona, and I was mentioning that in most places in this country, indeed most places in the world, there is a real sense of hopelessness, that there's no way we can fight this. There's too many people, there's too much money, there's too much gynocentrism, there's too many white knights. But we have this example in Arizona where that's just not the case. And you brought up repeatedly these armies of one, where there's just one person who's dog-headed enough, they have their relationship with their children at stake, they have their futures at stake, who've decided to come to not really necessarily get together with a group and do it, but just do it on their own and act on their own. But in addition to that, and we didn't discuss this too much previously, but there are several groups in Arizona who have been increasingly active in just the past few years. So, two things. Let's talk about, with our audience, why you think this whole thing sprung up in Arizona all of a sudden just in the past few years. And that's first of all. And secondly, who are these other groups? I know that the National Coalition of Men is involved. And how did they get formed, and what are some of the desperate goals that these groups have? But let's start with the first question. Why do you think that all of a sudden we're, just in your case, what started out as a book case turned out to be a real energetic activist organization, and that's just not just your group, but other groups in the past 3 years that have turned Arizona into a hotbed of men's rights activism? Why do you think this has all happened in the past 3 years? What do you think were the major factors?
Well, I think one of the first major factors is basically there's like a lot of anger. A lot of anger that has been going on with the passage of some of the more like national laws, like with the Violence Against Women Act. Men are actually seeing their earnings slip, and with that, their financial futures as well as their marriages now are crumbling because of that. There's a lot of factors that really have angered men not to become violent or to act out, but to do something creative and productive and be able to, how can I say it, so that where they can kind of be productive, they have that anger be a productive force in their life instead of a destructive one. I've seen that happen a lot. And really, like, the second thing is that there has been change here in Arizona. And ever since that law was passed in 2013, early 2013, more and more men are starting to realize that they have a stake in the political process. And the first part of having a stake in the political process is stepping out and actually saying, and I know this is really hard for men to do, is to step out and say, I was a victim, or that I have been discriminated against. And those two terms are kind of one and the same. And recently, I'm actually in the process of writing my second book, titled "Injustice in the Eloy Justice Courts," that deals with all of these false domestic violence cases. And amazingly, these men basically, was seeking me out. I was not seeking them out. Of course, we did put some ads, like we kind of put some ads out, but we weren't looking for them very aggressively. But they came forward with their stories of abuse and victimization from all over the state of Arizona, and their stories are going to be comprising my second book. So I would actually, so these individuals now are starting to speak out in greater numbers.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to I was going to expand on something that you touched upon about how it's hard for men to say that they're a victim of they're discriminated against. Why do you think that is? I have my own ideas about this, but why do you think that is, and why do you think that some of these men? What do you, besides their obvious motivation? What do you think the biggest feature was of these men who said, wait a minute, I am going to say that I was a victim of the system or this or that, and that I was discriminated against? What do you think the difference between those men and the men who don't do that are, and what do you think the factors are that keep men from doing that? I want to talk about my own ideas about that, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, I think men who actually, I guess men, from my own experience working with these men, there's actually a fear of coming out, a fear of looking weak, a fear of being vulnerable. Let's face it, that when these men come to me, they're actually coming to a complete stranger who they do not know, who are going to be sharing intimate details of their past, relationship that was a complete failure. And here they are with all their court documents sitting at a table in the middle of a restaurant, because that's where I usually meet these individuals.
Right.
And they're letting it all out. I mean, that's pretty fearful. I mean, you know how much courage it has to take for someone to do that. It's amazing, honestly, that they're doing that. And I think that, I guess, and it's really hard for a lot of men to say that I'm weak, that I need help, that I'm that I've been victimized. But once these men actually finally speak out and speak up, they kind of get that strength back.
Or maybe they found a strength they never thought they had, perhaps.
Correct. And it's for me, it's completely amazing to see these guys. I mean, and I work from with actually police officers who've been victimized by their wives. A border patrol agent was actually assaulted for years, and basically one time that he actually put his hand on her arm so she would stop hitting him, just trying to protect himself. She called the police. And again, this guy was...
Then he became the assailant after that, right? Yeah.
Correct. And he was sent to the Eloy Justice Court like everyone else, and thankfully his wife wised up and decided not to show for trial, and charges were dropped. So, but still, a lot of courage. Exactly.
Well, I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to expand on this because, there are two dimensions to this whole thing about why it's so hard for men to talk about these things and say, hey, look, I'm powerless in this situation and I need help, or I was really the victim of this kind of discrimination, or this woman did this to me and I want some justice. And here's what I think the reasons are. This is kind of I'm going to go off on a little bit of editorial spiel. I'll try to keep it down to 30 seconds, but this is what I'm going to say. We see this all the time, and we call it shaming language, where if a man complains that he is being treated unfairly as a man, he is thought of as a loser, as somebody who is less than a man. When starting from the time that boys are just old enough to walk and talk and interact socially, we condition them to say, you're going to grow up to be a man someday. You're going to be in power. You're going to have more agency than anybody else, and this is it. And you should never hit a woman, and you should never and if you're done wrong by somebody, it's probably your fault. And if you complain about anything, well, you're just whining. You hear this one of the first things that's hurled at you when you're a men's rights activist is, oh, you're just whining because you've lost your privilege, And what kind of privilege are we talking about? Did we ever really have any real privilege to begin with? I question that, but this is thrown in our face all the time, and we have this shaming language that's thrown at us, and men really do internalize this. Men really do. But when I see men start talking about these issues, I've seen that they find something in themselves they never thought they had. And that's the power, the real power, to communicate, to say, listen, I'm a human being. I should be treated like a human being, and I should be treated the same as every other human being. And simply because I'm not being treated as a human being, simply because I own a penis, I'm a man, there's something wrong with that, and I want to correct that. Once you get over that, the shaming language doesn't make any difference anymore, and that all goes away. That is a moment of power. That's real power. And exactly. It's amazing how this very narrow definition of male identity and this supposed male strength that we keep on trying to aspire to, which is really used as a way for other people to exploit us and a way to make us utilities. It's amazing what happens to men when they see this, when they take the red pill in this respect, and it's amazing what can happen when men start doing this, as what's happened in Arizona. Obviously, that's my analysis of what I see when I see men have a hard time coming forward.
The funny thing is that my communications director, Raven Roner, she's a very attractive 30-year-old woman, but she's definitely not feminist. And it's funny when we were talking about this guy who was thinking about joining our organization. He came. He basically saw her and said, being a men's rights activist, you give me hope for finding love. And Raven was, gee, thanks. I think at that point in time, we actually all lost what he was really trying to say, was the fact that many men who want to be men's rights activists choose not to do it because they're afraid that if they say that, that they're being discriminated against or that they have issues,
right,
that women won't love them. And
right.
And the whole conundrum. Yeah, that whole conundrum basically led me really to do some hard thinking. And if you know just as well as I do that the Honey Badgers, organization is a great face for the men's rights group, men's rights organizations, and they give men hope that not only can they say what's on their mind, is that they'll have women that will kind of hear them out as well.
Yeah, and there's at least a handful of women that will listen to them and take and understand what's going on.
Yeah, and another big thing that's really going on right now on Facebook is that I forget what it was called, but it was like hashtag not a feminist or I forget the hashtag. Yeah. Was it again?
Well, there's a couple. There's like Women Against Feminism feminists are ugly, and some harsh criticism towards feminism, which some people, and the whole women against feminism thing, that's some people question the real motivation behind that, whether or not that's a tradcon thing or not, and that's really maybe traditional women that want men to go back to the plantation or something like that. There's a lot to be spoken of that, but there's still this phenomenon of feminism itself being under attack in social media, which is worth talking about.
Yeah, and even those type of stories, kind of, even though they may be wrong-headed, when men listen to this, it kind of gives them a little shot of hope that one day they'll be able to find the love of their life, but yet be able to be vulnerable enough to actually say what's really on their mind. And that's not kind of going off on a tangent, but a lot of men who are in relationships just kind of sit back and take it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I'm gonna inject the MGTOW philosophy in here. There's a growing number of men who find hope in the idea that they don't even have to be in a relationship with a woman to be really happy and have a fulfilling life, which is another thing that men are heavily criticized for. If you're a lifelong bachelor like I am, boy, that's a whole can of worms for a lot of people. Have a hard time with that. And there's nothing wrong with trying to find love. I don't have any problem with that. But there's also this. There's a whole other avenue of freedom for men if they so choose to go their own way, and that's another problematic thing for a lot of men to just say, hey,
Correct.
I don't even need to find this whole quote love of my life thing is something that's not important to me, and I think that can lead down some pretty dangerous paths too. As you just pointed out, there are a lot of guys in relationships because they think that it's the path to happiness, but they're actually really miserable in these relationships, and it doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, exactly, 100%, 100%. And I totally agree with you on that one. But I don't want to kind of go off track too much. But I know you were asking me about about these other men's rights groups here in Arizona.
Sure, yeah. I was the one who was digressing, so please,
Oh, okay.
So
But
please,
we can talk about these things forever.
Yeah, sure, we certainly can.
But there's actually last month we actually had a huge meeting of the minds between all the men's rights groups in Arizona, and we actually were hammering out judicial ledgers, like an attack plan to be able to fight organizations such as the Arizona Coalition to End Domestic Violence and other feminist-leaning organizations who are, who are trying to sideswipe this new divorce law. And a couple of the organizations, I would like to mention them, the Arizona Family Foundation organization, the Arizona Fathers' Rights Foundation, NCFM Arizona. I knew I was forgetting another one. And there's actually two other organizations in the process of development that were also at the meeting. And it was really an amazing event last month, because not only did you have, a room full of men, but you had at least 35-40% of the attendees who were leaders in these organizations were women. They were women of all different ages and all different backgrounds, and you know what? They were ready to fight the fight. And it was a really amazing show of diversity that was there. And so that basically, it really kind of gave me hope that, we can really fight back with these, against this like wrong-headed legislation that's most likely going to be pushed starting this November in the Arizona State Legislature about domestic violence issues. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a tidbit of what was occurring at that meeting, we basically kind of divvied up what we do best. And we basically focused on a couple of things. And we were given responsibilities to try to fight this wrong-headed legislation. Everything from one organization doing the fundraising aspect, the Arizona Fathers Coalition doing the fundraising aspect. My organization, the Men's Rights Group of Arizona, will be doing the actual research on domestic violence statistics to actually put in to put in the bill itself that we're going to be passing, or at least try to pass. And the Arizona Children and Fathers Foundation will also be working directly with the state Senate and the Arizona state senators and legislators to work on this bill, to get these bills passed that we want passed, and to fight the bills that that we don't really want there, to try to get them out of, to kind of get them out of the Arizona State Senate. But one of the key things, too, is that we've actually identified a number of senators and legislators at that meeting that are very passionate, if not giddy, about our cause. And you would be really shocked to really know who they are. And I would say half of them are actually female legislators that are more than willing to stand up for men's rights.
So let's talk about the characteristics of these legislators and not their names, of course, because I've heard this before, where at the state level, and I've seen this at the federal level too, but not so much there as I have in the state level. I've heard stories of there are these legislators that have never ever talked about these subjects before, but when they're confronted with activists who come into their office to lobby, they're like, "Wow, you know what? I can really get behind this. Let's do something about this," and that's incredibly good news. But besides a lot of them being women, what are some of their other characteristics? Do they have histories in their lives where either themselves or male loved ones were done wrong in divorce court or in a domestic violence incidents or alimony or child custody? What are some characteristics of these folks?
Well, there's an old saying in Arizona politics, is that there's politics behind the politics.
Right.
And of course, being just a statewide organization, we've been around. We know like the landscape, and we know who has an axe to grind against someone else. In the large, and some of it is genuine concern for men's rights issues, because they have a son, they have grandsons, they might have brothers who went through a really horrible divorce.
Right.
One of these senators that are actually on our side, from what I was told by a secondhand source, is that there are organizations that she just plainly don't like, that are on the opposite side of our agenda, and she's more than willing to go ahead and pass any bill that we want and bring it up to the floor for a vote. Doesn't mean it's going to get past the floor, but if it's against certain organizations or certain politicians within the House, she's more than willing to go ahead and give it the heave ho and just kind of stick it in the eye of someone she really doesn't like. And just to kind of, from my experience, that is one of the powerful issues of having a statewide men's rights organization, because we can identify the cracks in the armor, so to say. And not only that, but dollars don't vote. People do. And just recently,
Right.
we actually got rid of a judge in Casa Grande, Arizona, who was running for the JP 2 position, and this individual judge actually granted an order of protection against a male who, unlike Facebook, I want to say, claimed that he was a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault at the hands of his girlfriend, and the police did nothing. Well, that was enough for her to go down to the judge and get an order of protection, for which the judge signed. Well, because of his actions, he's no longer going to be, in part because of his actions against men's rights issues, he's no longer a judge. He lost his candidacy to run as a Republican for his seat. So, again, some of the things that we do as well is at least for the Men's Rights Group of Arizona, we'll actually help certain individuals campaign. We actually are working right now with a judge in Eloy by the name of Mr. Wilson, and he's actually the current sitting city judge for Eloy, but he's trying to take over Judge Larona's old spot that she's going to be vacating in January. So we're helping him out, trying to get him elected, because we know that if he had a domestic violence case out in front of him, he would actually hear all the facts and just not some made-up story. So, again, it's really just paid dividends being local in a lot of these cases. But I know I kind of got sidetracked. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's what I mean. That's what we're doing here. I know that we have people in the chat room. They're talking about calling in. There's 54 users in the chat room right now. Again, the number is 214-272-0408. Let's get some callers in. Unfortunately, we cannot take Skype callers right now. Unfortunately, that's the way. It's a technical limitation as of now. That is really kind of hurt our call-in base, but that's okay. We still have a call-in number. Again, the number is 214-272-0408. Looking for callers. So, what's the future looking like now? I know that we got an upcoming election coming on right now. Maybe you don't know what your opponents are up to. They're certainly not going to show their hand. But what are some plans for the future? Some things that you would like to see happen, legislatively and otherwise.
Well, right now we are actually working really hard here in the state of Arizona. Most of the domestic violence cases that get pushed in right now that are pushed and charged are actually misdemeanors. And these misdemeanor cases are going in front of a judge, like Judge Lorona, who has who basically has a bias, not only because she owns her own behavioral health agency, it's also because she has to get elected. Well, you don't get elected by letting people off the hook. And if that ever gets out that she keeps, or any type of judge keeps allowing people to walk, well, they're not going to be a judge for long. There's an old saying here in Arizona: if you ever get charged in the Justice of the Peace Court, you're going to be guilty. Not because you are guilty; it's because the judge needs to vote the next election cycle. So, what I'm trying to do, and what the Men's Rights Group of Arizona is trying to do, and the Arizona Coalition for Fathers and Families are trying to do, we're trying to change these domestic violence laws to make it mandatory, even in misdemeanor courts, for domestic violence cases only, that they have to be heard by a jury. And in that
as they
jury,
should be, because it's a criminal accusation that you assaulted somebody. That's a criminal accusation. You should have the right to a jury trial.
That is true in most states, but in the state of Arizona, if it's a misdemeanor, you do not have the right to a jury trial in a misdemeanor case. That's one of the unfortunate issues right now that's going on in domestic violence legislation. Another thing that we need to have changed here in the state of Arizona is that we have such a low standard of evidence in these domestic violence trials, that basically what happens is that when you go in front of a judge to be convicted of a crime of domestic violence, the judge just has to go with the preponderance of the evidence, meaning that the same amount of evidence needed to get a conviction is the same level of evidence that is needed to actually to sue you, or to take a landlord to court, or
to get a traffic ticket.
Like a traffic ticket. So because the fact that domestic violence laws actually impede your constitutional rights.
Sure.
I mean, it's ludicrous to actually have such a low level.
You get thrown in jail. You get your kids taken from you. You get all these kind of disadvantages in divorce court. You have your kids taken away from you, your house, everything. It's that's right. This whole hate. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, like in Arizona, domestic violence is not really about putting you in jail. No one ever goes to jail except for the initial arrest. The very next day you get out of jail. Domestic violence charges really are a way to fleece you.
Right.
Basically, you don't spend a day in jail in Arizona. You don't even spend a full day in jail in Arizona for domestic violence, for a minor domestic violence issue. Now,
you spend a lot of money is what you spend.
Correct. Several of the individuals in my second book have actually spent $10,000 or more on an attorney who basically took their money and ran, because the attorney didn't tell them, and they should have told them, that there is actually a 99% conviction rate statewide for domestic violence cases. Now I cannot. There's no, scientific report that this is happening. But I basically, for my second book, I set in domestic violence courts and domestic violence trials, and every single one of them was guilty. And they've already got these people's guilt, these men's guilt, down to the point where they already filled up the paperwork. When there's a guilty verdict, the judge just pretty much signs the document on the bottom, dates it, and then hands it to the court clerk. I mean, it's almost like rubber stamped. So
that is rubber stamping.
Again, yeah, it's basically a rubber stamp. And basically domestic violence cases here in the state of Arizona really involve two things: either the divorce case, or the ending of a relationship. Basically, those are the two the two factors that goes into every single false domestic violence complaint. And honestly, when I see these guys who were going through a divorce and all of a sudden they ended up with domestic violence charges, you always know that there's actually a domestic violence charge coming sooner or later. And I'll give you a good example. This guy, Don, I won't use his last name. He was involved with this woman who had bipolar disorder. And this guy was really into her, and he thought that he was going to make a future with her. Well, they were having problems about a year or so before they broke up. She got pregnant, and, he was going to marry her. But then he found out that she was still married to her previous husband. Well, they got into like a little argument, and lo and behold, he got falsely accused of domestic violence because he yelled at her, right? So he got charged for domestic violence because he was yelling at his girlfriend. Well, he was put in jail, and while he was put in jail for a day, she actually forged his signature on his business, right? Signing over his business, his bakery.
Yeah, right. That's a common thing that happens in domestic violence relations. You have someone, especially in case someone's married, they have power of attorney, and while you're in jail, they can do all kinds of nasty things to you while you're in jail.
Yeah, well, see, this guy wasn't married. It was a boyfriend-girlfriend type of relationship. She was married to another guy, but she found out a couple of weeks prior, a couple of days or a couple of weeks prior, which started the argument. So they weren't even married, but she forged his signature on the Arizona Corporation Commission documents, and while he was in jail, she basically took his business, got an order of protection out against him, banned him from his own business, and the next day she was running it. She was actually on TV the next day, on KGUN 9, touting her business profile on TV. Well, the guy was sitting in jail that same day. So again, you just don't. Every time that there's a domestic violence case that I've seen here in Arizona, it always comes to the point where there's either a breakup in the relationship, or that there's a divorce pending, or there's actually even theft involved. And there's another guy in my book who was actually roommates with another male, right? They were just roommates. And his roommate wasn't paying rent. And he basically told his roommate that he needed to go ahead and pay rent, right? Like any normal human being. Well, he basically called the police and claimed that this roommate this guy that I was working with hit him. Well, he got arrested, got thrown in jail, and lo and behold, the very next day he was hit with an order of protection banning him from the residence. Well, as he got banned from the residence, his roommate, who wasn't paying rent, took everything out of his house and sold it. Pretty much robbed him blind. And then he just moved out of state. But these domestic violence laws just not just affect men in relationships. They affect everybody.
Everybody, yeah. There's one question in the chat room that came up from Eric, who asked, does the public defender's budget come out of the judge's budget, or is a completely separated budget like the district attorney budget? And if so, do you see a conflict of interest in this for men concerning domestic violence cases? Do you know the answer to that question?
Can you say that one more time, please?
Okay. Does the public defender's budget come out of the judge's budget, or is it a completely separated budget like the district attorney's budget? And if so, do you see a conflict of interest in this for men concerning domestic violence cases? I'm guessing in the case of domestic violence cases, does the defender's budget come out of the judge's budget? And
no.
Okay.
No. In the state of Arizona, the budgets are actually the same. They actually all come out of one county pool, but there's no funding stream that links the county attorney's office, the Pinal County Attorney's Office, or any county attorney's office to the judge itself. Now, here's a caveat to that. These, in the case of Judge Lerona, if you look on the National Institute of Justice website and pull up Eloy arrest records and policies, in that report through the National Institute of Justice, basically outlines how Judge Lerona was not only making money for her private behavioral health agency, the grants that she received came out of the Violence Against Women Act funds. It also increased her staff and her very own court.
Right.
So not only was this grant given to her behavioral health agency to increase their staffing and their funding, it was also given to increase her staffing and funding within her court. Now, that doesn't seem, that does seem odd, right? Well, Eloy is a very small area. There's only about 6,000 to 7,000 individuals in that entire area that live there and work there. Very few. So she's able to kind of keep her power and control during every election because she employs these individuals, or she just buys them off using the Violence Against Women funding. It's my book that has been published in May basically highlights how this funding stream works. Is that she actually has to have so many people convicted in her own court in order for this money to keep going, right? And one of the ironies of this entire Violence Against Women Act funding for her in particular is the fact that her behavioral health agency helps women, fill out forms for an order of protection, right? So her employee at her behavioral health agency helps these women who make false reports all the time from the Pinal Hispanic Council, makes these false police reports, and then they basically walk about half a block away to where the court is located, and then basically hands her boss, this domestic violence advocate, hands her boss the paperwork to sign. So,
right.
It's one of the sickest and twisted domestic violence industries in a small little rural town that you would ever want to find. And making matters worse is even the police officers in the city of Eloy are making money off of this because many of their wives and girlfriends work for Judge Lerona at the Pinal Hispanic Council. One in particular is Maria Tarango. Maria Tarango is actually related to Detective Tarango, who does the domestic violence cases. Maria Tarango is the Human Resources Director for Pinal Hispanic Council, and her funding or her income is based in part for how many convictions the Eloy Justice Court receives, because that funding goes into her pay. So everyone's making money off this: the police department, the court, the judge, and even the behavioral health agency. So now that's one place I'd be very scared to be male. Living in that little city.
Well, it's about 10:51 here. We've had one question coming from the comments. I know we had a healthy amount of listeners, but we just didn't get any callers tonight. But Richard, I do want to thank you so much for calling in. It's been a great show. I'm sure we'll get people asking for it to be uploaded to YouTube, and people can distribute it that way to spread the good news about Men's Rights Group Arizona. And this is really, and again, I want to say this again. This group is a perfect example of a real success story in men's rights. It was, just the past 3 years, some real strides have been made. Some real big strides have been made, and there's every reason to be optimistic in the future. But I'm sure it's still going to be an uphill battle for a little ways to go, Richard. But thanks for joining us, and I really appreciate you being on, and I appreciate everything that's going on over in Arizona. I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. James, do we have any final advice for our listeners?
Absolutely. Take the red pill.